so I realized I had to learn a lot about the drugs she was taking and why, and that inspired learning. This process of learning inspired, well, what I learned shocked me and inspired the making of the film. My filmmaking partner, Wendy, and I read copiously after this, more than 20 books. We discovered one of which was Anatomy of an Epidemic by Robert Whitaker, which everybody must read if they have not. We discovered a treasure trove of online support groups, published studies, unpublished studies. We began to meet incredible people in the field, peers, leaders, experts in this movement that was shedding light on many of these issues. And we interviewed hundreds of patients out there, all of whom were suffering from the harmful effects of psychiatric drugs. And each of their stories, like Angie's, moved us deeply. And it was then that what had begun as a personal quest for me turned into a mission to make this story, bring this story to light. It's not the whole story. We acknowledge that there are other legitimate perspectives out there, but this is a story that is not being told, and we knew that we had to tell it. We want the dialogue. We want people who have different experiences. The most important part about this film is that we all get together and talk about it and challenge it and listen to it. And on that note, I would like to extend a huge thank you to our panelists who are here today. We have two incredible doctors, Dr. Georgia Eade, Harvard trained, board certified, specializing in nutritional and metabolic psychiatry. Dr. Natalie Sadler, holistic and integrative psychiatrist. And Angie Peacock, who I like to call our Phi Beta Kappa road warrior, who has been in fact on the road conducting more than 40 screenings on her own. And this one is our 79th screening. So they started in person and now they're virtual. And anyway, we're excited. Nicole Lamberson is with Angie, the two of them are spearheading our outreach efforts. So thank you to both of these guys for working so hard. We're going to now ask each panelist to introduce themselves briefly and to share maybe some impressions about the film. And then we will open up the Zoom to your questions to our audience members, because you guys bring so much to the table. And every time we have one of these, we all learn so much. So thank you for being here. And Dr. Eade, why don't you begin introducing yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Lynn. And hi, everybody. Thank you for this really important film. It is telling a story that doesn't get told often enough. And as somebody who prescribed medicines for nearly 20 years, I can tell you these stories do happen all the time. There's certainly other kinds of stories of people who have benefited from medication, people who have really improved their quality of life through medication, but these stories, these painful, courageously told stories are real, and they do happen all the time. So overprescribing medications, piling one medication on top of another, visits that are too short, psychiatrists who don't sometimes, unfortunately, believe their patients or take the time to get to know their patients. And there are a lot of reasons, why that happens, and it can be very, very hard to find to find somebody who has the time to be able to really get to know you and work with you, and to use other approaches first, and to properly educate people about medication if it gets to that point. I now practice with a food first approach, because everything I've studied has taught me that sometimes, the film is called Medicating Normal, and it's true, we do over pathologize normal grief, normal suffering. We're not supposed to feel comfortable all the time. But I also believe that sometimes what we are now considering to be normal is not normal, and that a lot of the chemistry that can go on behind prolonged grief reactions, abnormal, really disabling symptoms, may not need medication. They just may need to be addressed with, lifestyle changes, psychotherapy, time, patience, support, love and understanding. Those things are should always be done first whenever possible. So, you know, I think that it's really important that we not stigmatize people who choose to use medication or who benefit from them, but also that we hear these stories and believe these stories that are very real about people who suffer not only when they're taking medication, but also when they're trying to come off these medications. And it can be an excruciating process. And so many psychiatrists do not believe that these are real phenomena that happen to people. And so I work with people all the time who are trying to come off medication. So I think that the film is really important, and that people will learn from it to, you know, really learn before they take a psychiatric medication, and really try other approaches first, and use medication either as a last resort or as a very carefully informed choice, because there are so many risks involved with taking these medications. We don't really understand how these medications work often. So anyway, thank you for making the film and for inviting me.
Dr. Sadler, do you want to?
Sure. I'm a holistic psychiatrist. I'm located in North Carolina, and I tend to look at a lot of different things going on with a patient. I've spent a lot of years helping people get off medication or treating them with supplements, diet, other things that will keep them from needing to be on medication. So I have to say I agree with everything Dr. Ed is saying, and my biggest thing is when somebody comes to me and they've got difficult symptoms, the first thing I do is look at what medications are you taking, so that I have an idea. And when I say, you know, I think your medicine may be causing your problem, say depressive symptoms or psychotic symptoms or whatever, I've had that people are usually going to somebody else. They haven't been seeing me. And so I often will send them back to their doctor to talk about coming down on their meds. And the doctors will say, oh, you know, you can't do that, or there's no such thing as too much medicine. That was one of the comments one of the doctors made. And there's no education for physicians on what they're doing, the impact of what they're doing. I truly believe they think they're doing good. I don't think they actually understand the real consequences. Coming off medication, particularly if you do it cold turkey, can be horrible. It's bad enough if you, and I advocate for very, very, very slow tapers. Not to do anything quickly. And sometimes I put people on supplements to help with the withdrawal effects, to make them less, then they can later not take the supplements. But to me, there's so much harm that's done that people don't even realize. They don't understand the effects of the medication until after they're believing, they're trusting, they're coming in, and patients come in and they trust if they're told to take something, it's going to help them. And it may for a little bit, but then the downside is so much worse. And I find it, it's really difficult for me as a physician, because I'm going to say it's embarrassing to be a psychiatrist and see other psychiatrists doing this, conventional psychiatrists. So I appreciate your having me here. And I have to say, every time I watch this film, I wind up with tears in my eyes at the end. I'm so grateful for the people who participated in it, who have worked so hard to be off the medication and to bring this information to light, so other people who are having problems can see what's going on. I think the value in what you're sharing is incredible.
Thank you. Angie.
Hi, I'm Angela Peacock. You saw my story in the film. Since the film stopped, I graduated with my master's in social work. I did 13 months of internship as a outpatient mental health therapist with people that I did not have to diagnose. or send to a psychiatrist if I could help it.
Good.
We didn't have to bill insurance or anything. So I got to see both sides of the fence. And then I did a little work in policy around trying to change the culture of over-medication within the Department of Veterans Affairs. So I've done a fellowship where I was sent to Capitol Hill to talk about it. And now I just do outreach for the film and try to help get this and talk about this. And I just feel really blessed to be able to talk so openly about it, because it is a stigmatized topic to say that I'm off my meds, the meds hurt me, and let's talk about it. So I look forward to the conversation today.
So Nicole, you're going to be our moderator, and I presume you're looking at the chat box.
Well, no, actually, so my name's Nicole Lamberson. I, like Lynn said, I do some of the outreach for Medicating Normal. I'm a physician assistant, and I am an ex-psych patient who took medication and was harmed as well. I'll be fielding all of your questions today. So please use the Q&A box solely for your questions. If you're putting them in the chat box, they may get lost, but you're free to use the chat box to chat amongst each other as well. And I just want to let everyone know that this is being recorded. We will keep your name anonymous, however, when I read the questions, and anything you type in the chat box or the Q&A box will never be published or put anywhere publicly. So I'm going to start for the first question. How does one know if their problem is one that requires medication or not? Would you like to try?
Doctors has to take that.
Yes, Dr. Eid, perhaps?
Yes. So I always, my mantra is if you're suffering from any kind of a physical or mental health problem, the first place to look is always somewhere else before medications. Look at your diet, look at your lifestyle, look at your relationships, look at your physical health, and use medications again either as a last resort or as an informed choice if you don't want to look at those other pieces. Some people don't want to do psychotherapy. Some people don't want to change their diet. Some people don't want to change a relationship situation that they're in, which is unhealthy. So I always like to understand, well, what is causing the problem in the first place? Let's see if we can find out the root causes. And that takes time. It takes conversation. It takes really getting to know people, not having somebody come in and at their very first appointment giving them a prescription. So I think it's really important to ask deeper questions first. There is no easy way to know whether the situation, there's no quick answer to say, well, this is definitely a chemical problem, or this is definitely a life problem, a circumstantial problem, without having a longer conversation with people who care about you and with professionals who have the time to get to know you. So unless there's a crisis situation or other options are not available or not being chosen, I would use medications. I would only use medications as a last resort or in an emergency.
I think the question also was, how do you know if the medications are the problem if you're not feeling very well? Is that what the question was, Nicole? Was it?
No, that's actually a second question. So if you think this movie, maybe your own medication story, she says in her case, I'm in my late 30s with 20 years on meds. Where do you start?
Good question. I think you have to start with a doctor that can help you look at your diet and look at all the things that Dr. Eid was talking about. And then you have to see how, what medicines, how do you make a decision about what medicines to taper and what order you want to do it. You can't change everything at once. You have to do it sequentially, and you have to do it in some kind of well thought out pattern while you're making these other changes to your diet and to relationships and other things. You have to be careful because it's stressful to come off medication, but also I want to say even changing diet can be stressful for a lot of people because they're used to eating fast foods and they're used to eating a lot of processed foods, and to have to stop and get real food and cook and actually learn how to buy food at the farmer's market. You know, all of that is change, and you don't want to overstress your system. So sometimes you have to work on getting your diet changed and helping your body get back to a more normal space before you start decreasing any medications. And then you need to do it very, very slowly.
Okay.
I would just add that last frame, I don't know what you call it in filmmaker speak, but the last picture at the end of the film where it says, talk to your doctor about before you stop taking any medication, but please inform yourself about safe tapering. So I just wanted to draw attention. On our website, we have some resources, but there's things out there in the lay community because there's such a lack of evidence base for safe tapering, or the deprescribing movement is just kind of getting started now. But so there's a lot of resources specifically on this website called the Withdrawal Project, and it talks all about like what you should know before you start tapering the first drug. Even if you have a doctor that helps you, you should still like read the entire drug pamphlet that comes with your medication. You should still check drug interactions. You should still know like which could maybe have a more severe effect, or do I taper them all together, or do I taper them one at a time? I made a lot of mistakes in my tapering. I didn't know any of this information. I did trust my doctor to taper me safely, and it completely almost killed me. And I went back with evidence because I was lucky to go to a college where I had access to the medical database. So I knew how to read research. I knew that I was experiencing benzodiazepine withdrawal. He didn't believe me. So a lot of harm can happen when you blindly trust people to make decisions for your body. So I would definitely look at the Withdrawal Project, all about like drug taper rates. That's the article I'm thinking of, but it's on our website too.
Okay, so both of you, the psychiatrists, have mentioned diet quite a bit. And one of the questions is, how important is managing your diet when tapering off of antidepressants?
Oh, I would say it's very important. There's research done, and I think it was in 2009, Felicia Jacka, Jacka, from Australia, did a study, and she's done many studies since then, but this one was published in the American Psychiatric Journal, and it was literally about how different diets affect your mental health. And it makes a huge difference. If you are eating a lot of junk food, you tend to be more depressed and have more psychiatric problems. If you are eating whole food, you tend to be less depressed and have fewer psychiatric symptoms. So just changing your diet can make a huge difference in how you feel. You may not realize it. It sounds too simple to be true, but it really is. And there's research behind it.
Yes, and I think that one of the things that Dr. Sadler said was so important is that changing diet can be difficult. Changing any behavior can be difficult. And if you're already depressed and anxious, sometimes it can feel really overwhelming to try to change your diet. That's why it can take some time, some support, some practice. And it also takes understanding which dietary changes are most worth making and why. And so for some people, simply moving to a whole foods pattern, which is a big change for most people because we don't realize how many foods we eat are processed and are damaging to the brain and to the body. That can take a lot of practice just to get to a whole foods pattern. And then if that's not helpful enough, for some people, particularly the growing majority of us who have damaged metabolism, brain metabolism, body metabolism, carbohydrate metabolism is damaged for most of us now. For those people, it can be very helpful and worth considering to try a low carbohydrate or ketogenic diet, which changes the way the brain processes energy. And so it improves access to energy, decreases inflammation, decreases oxidative stress, and supports the growth and healing mechanisms that are naturally part of everybody's brain that we're all entitled to, but we often can't access if we're eating the wrong way. So if you eat a lot of sugar and vegetable oil and junk foods and flour and cereals and those sorts of things, it can damage the brain's metabolism over time. And and so these changes are very important, but they can be challenging to make, and to make those changes first or after the medication taper really depends on the individual circumstance. So some people will want to look at the medications first, and some people want to look at the diet first. But I do think that that the goal should always be to use the least amount of medication possible. And even if it may take a year or two to get there, it's really worth the time and investment to find out how you're actually feeling underneath all of that medication.
So we have another physician here. He says, as a family physician, I've had a similar troubling realization of the degree to which the pharmaceutical industry has influenced the academic community regarding statin medications and heart disease. Question for the psychiatrists on the panel as to how completely misrepresented this psychiatric medication issue is.
Was it about statin drugs in particular, or psychiatric medications, or both? But I guess one thing I could say, and I definitely want to hear what Dr. Sadler has to say about this too, is that the statin drugs are an excellent example. Every statin drug, some to a larger degree than others, cross the blood-brain barrier and interfere with cholesterol production in the brain. And the brain needs cholesterol, so it's such an important molecule to the brain that every molecule of cholesterol in the brain is made in the brain itself, by the brain itself. It doesn't come from your diet. It's that important. So if you take a statin drug and it crosses into the brain, which it will do, it will reduce the production of an important molecule that your brain requires to function properly. And that's just one example of how medications are, we don't think enough about them. Doctors don't, we don't have, honestly, every medication is so complicated. When you look at those package inserts, very few doctors know every single word of those package inserts. It's just, nobody has the time to study all of these medications in the depth that you would need to prescribe in a really, in a truly responsible manner, to give somebody informed consent about, hundreds of side effects. It's not logistically possible. And that's why I completely agree with what Angie said, is that you need to inform yourself about these medications. But back to the doctor's question, the psychiatric medications, for example, the SSRIs, the studies say that they can, be helpful in a certain percentage of people, but it's actually only 10% more than placebo. And so many people are excluded from those studies. And those are the people that you and I in the real world, that have different combinations of symptoms. They don't meet, they don't meet full criteria. They don't fit neatly into the diagnostic categories. All of those people are excluded from drug studies. They pick very, very clean cases and study the drugs in those cases, and then only for short periods of time. And so I do think that, just like every other medication, psychiatry suffers the same problem, is that we want to believe that they work, and we want to help people. We want to find ways to help people. And so for years, the way I practiced was I tried to help people by using medications, because that was the only tool I had in my toolbox other than psychotherapy, which I also used. But I think that it's so, I think we all have to keep a really open mind and stay skeptical and curious and believe our patients, and learn as much as we have the time to learn, and practice really, really carefully. We can't get our information from pharmaceutical reps, and the package insert will only tell you what happened to the patients that were in those studies. They will not tell you what's going to happen to the person in front of you. So every time I prescribed a medication, I would say, this is the list of possible side effects, but I have no idea how this medication is going to affect you, because you've never taken it before. It's really like doing a little experiment every single time you see a patient. And to keep an open mind and to say, whatever happens, just tell me. And if something new is happening for you that hasn't happened before, we're going to blame the medicine first and ask questions later, because it's just impossible to be able to predict how a particular medicine will behave in a particular individual.
Now,
I want to add, just adding on to that, I just wanted to say Ivan, the pharmacist who is in the film, is an incredible pharmacist, and he knows so much about these drugs. And when his patients or his clients come in, he encourages them to keep a journal and to write, when they start a drug, to write down in the journal, exactly what they feel and when, after, 2 days after, 3 days after, was it after food, was it, and that way, when they go back to their doctor, they are armed with specific information that is very helpful to the doctor. And it also, patients generally don't have a voice and they're not, what they say isn't considered legitimate unless there's some sort of scientific, accurate reporting of what's going on. And I think that Ivan's advice is incredible, and I think it would help everybody to just be aware of what something does to themselves, empower themselves, and use your own observations. Sorry, Dr. Sadler, you can weigh in too.
Yeah, I was going to say statin drugs are the one of the ones that most people come in that are on a statin and they're depressed. The first thing I say is you really need to get off the statin. In answer to the question, I think most research is biased. It's presented in a way to make the drug look good, not the whole truth. So call it corruption. I think that's what it is. I think the results are corrupted. So I tend to look at who's funding the research. And if the research is funded by a drug company, then I tend to have much less confidence in it. If it's funded by somebody independent, that I tend to take it a little bit more seriously. But I tend to go with a more functional medicine approach. So I'm looking at what's the cause, and somebody on a statin, I will look at them and say, okay, how can we change your diet? What is it that we need to do to help if your cholesterol is really too high? Now that's a whole nother issue of cholesterol levels, and they've changed over the years, and I could go in with that, but it's like everything can go back to diet. It may take longer to come down. There might be some supplements that you could take that would help with the cholesterol, but let me remind you that cholesterol is an important nutrient in your body, and cholesterol makes your sex, that bad cholesterol makes your sex hormones. Like, you need the cholesterol. It's not something, what you have to do is change your diet so that you can manage your body can manage cholesterol. Your body's going to make cholesterol. It has to. You can't live without it. It's in your cell walls. You have to have it, but you don't have to have either as much, or you don't have to have it. I want to say there, you can regulate it most often with diet, and there are other functional medicine treatments that you can do for high cholesterol, if indeed it's high. Sometimes they're telling you it's high when, to me, that's not really the case. But I've been around a long time, and when I started out, the cholesterol levels were different than they are now, because people connected to drug companies changed them. It's an arbitrary range that they've set. So this is another thing that, to me, makes dealing with medications, I just don't trust it. When I was in medical school, the dean came in the first day and he said, half of what we're going to teach you is wrong. We just don't know which half. And that made me a skeptic from day one. And every time I learned something, I took it in with, and this might be wrong. And so I tend to, and what I've tried to look for is, well, if this might be wrong, what really is true? What really does work? What makes a difference?
I hear you. Oh, there you go. Sorry, never mind.
Hi, great film. Thank you. I saw Dr. Kelly Brogan was interviewed, so I was surprised to not hear any mention of the role of the gut microbiome with regard to brain health. Not really a question, but
well, we've been talking about diet, and I talked about early on about checking the gut as part of what, to me, if your gut's not functioning, your whole body isn't going to function. Your immune system doesn't function. Your brain doesn't function. I mean, everything goes downhill. So sort of, what is it? Hippocrates said the gut is the center of all illness. And I tend to agree. That has to, but diet is sort of the place where you start, and then you can look at what else you need to do. You can do testing for candida or infections or other things that affect your absorption of food. But what you're eating itself is still critically important. If you treat the gut and you don't change your diet, you're gonna, in the end, you're shooting yourself in the foot.
Yeah, the gut communicates with the brain in a variety of different ways, and so gut health is critically important to brain health. A lot of my patients will say to me that their brain health started to go downhill after their gut health went downhill. It's not true for everybody. It's true for a lot of people, though. So they'll take a course of antibiotics, or they'll have a gastroenteritis, some sort of infection, and whatever symptoms they were having mental health-wise before, they were either well before or they didn't suffer as much before. And there's a very strong connection, and the research is really clear about this powerful connection. What's less clear is what to do about it. So the research right now is not yet at the place where we can say, eat this way to cure your microbiome ills. The research just isn't at that point yet. All we know right now is that gut health matters, that food quality matters, but we're not yet able to tell people exactly how to eat to optimize their microbiome.
And I just want to say, I think that's part of what led up to my breakdown, per se. Besides the trauma, we were given an anti-malaria preventative, doxycycline, and we were taking that daily. So it blew my gut apart. If you saw me in the with all my my bones showing and everything, that was after, you know, like a month of antibiotics every day. Plus we had tons of immunizations, exposed to burn pits, all kinds of stuff that veterans are exposed to. But instead of treating the gut or the environmental toxins, we're throwing psychiatric drugs at it, and we wonder why 20 veterans a day are killing themselves. It's madness. So yes, when I traced it back, but see, when I was on all the medications, I couldn't even make those connections because I was so utterly like spellbound by the meds. Like I couldn't think clearly. I couldn't think of, you know, causation or what I could possibly do more to help myself. It wasn't until I was able to taper off and do like the harm reduction approach where things became more clear. Like, wait a minute, remember that happened, and then that happened. Then I had salmonella, and then I was given more antibiotics, you know? So I always, my ears always open when people talk about this, because I can feel how sensitive my gut is now after coming off all the meds. And I know immediately, like when the food goes in my mouth, I can feel like, is this good for me or bad for me? Like I know pretty quickly, just because of how clean my diet is now, healing and stuff. I'm on the keto diet. Not that diet is going to heal anyone from withdrawal all the time, but it definitely helps me. So yeah.
So two people kind of asked a similar question, so I'll merge them together. As a brand new psych nurse practitioner, I'm already aware of the danger of benzos. I've followed you for several months, Dr. Eid, and appreciate your approach. How can I best advocate for my patients and safely prescribe as needed? Do you suggest any specific resources? And then the other one is a psychiatric physician assistant. How do I become trained in this better way of treating my patients?
Those are really good questions, and I hope Dr. Sadler will chime in too, because these are, you know, the fact that she and I are both practicing in this different way is proof that you can do this, and there are many different paths to get here. There are no formal training programs currently. I'm working on something. Other people I think are working on things as well, but educate yourself to start with. And you can, if you want to just write to me separately, I can send you some resources specific to your questions. But in terms of prescribing responsibly, it really is, as so many of the people in the film, and including Angie made this point, informed consent. So just be honest with people about the limitations of your knowledge when it comes to medication, about, you know, sort of the fact that we don't know, you know, how a medication will behave in a particular individual, and that there are risks and benefits, and to talk through the alternatives. And that way, you're two adults having a conversation, and you're sharing the responsibility for the decision. And that way, whatever happens, you'll be going through it together with your eyes open, all four eyes, yours and the patient's eyes, all open, and learning and paying attention. Medicines really can help some people. I have to, and I know that story is told all the time, and that's not the point of the film. But medicines can be helpful for some people, and sometimes medicines are very important in crisis situations or in situations where people don't have other options. But just staying open-minded, staying curious, believing your patient, learning as much as you have time to learn about the medications, and learning as much as you have time to learn about other approaches, whatever approach matters most to you. Maybe you're interested most in diet, or maybe you're interested most in psychotherapy, or maybe you're interested most in other kinds of lifestyle changes, other kinds of modalities. But really it's about getting to root causes, and whichever one is most interesting to you. So if you're interested in nutrition, hopefully there'll be some new things coming down the pike to organize ways to learn, and I'll keep people updated about that. But in the meantime, play it safe, play it simple, whole foods diets, healthy relationships, fresh air, exercise, psychotherapy, building a relationship, building rapport with people that you're working with, get to know them before making any moves, unless there's a crisis situation, just slowing down and taking your time and being humbled by, by the field. There's so much we still don't understand. So I don't know, anything more specific, just write to me, so that we don't take up too much time with links and things like that.
Can I add one thing that someone observed about what the film did for them, and that is when you go in to see a doctor, ask about the exit plan. Like, yes, maybe there is a need to be on something, but if you can ask your doctor, when do I get off of this? Can I get off of it? How do I get off of it? I think you're way ahead of the game already. And then, anyway, that's from the patient perspective. But as a doctor or a nurse, I'm sure you can talk about that too. The exit plan.
Yeah, and I forgot to say, I should say, because right before the film started, we talked for a few minutes, all of us together on the panel, and we're talking about, well, how do you find good psychiatrists? And there are good psychiatrists. There really are lots of them in the world. Sometimes it's just hard to find. I actually forgot that a few years ago, I wrote an article for Psychology Today. It's called something like, how to find a good psychiatrist, or how to find a rose among thorns, or something like that. It's a free article. You can look it up, and it sort of walks you through how to, if you need to find somebody, some tips. But Dr. Sadler, how did you become interested in this yourself, and what do you recommend when people say, how do I learn more about this?
Oh, that's a good question. I have right now I have nurse practitioner students who are shadowing me for part of their clinical training. I got interested in it. I majored in math and minored in food and nutrition in college. So I liked nutrition. And when I got into medical school, it was lacking, but I had a pretty good understanding of it. And so once I got out, that was kind of how I worked with people, was with their nutrition and diet and that sort of thing. And I really started learning on my own. I tend to go and read what I feel drawn to. So there are things that I read or saw, and I've learned a lot about whole food based nutrients, supplements that are whole food based as opposed to synthetic or partially food. Now they have Institute for Functional Medicine, and it teaches a lot of good information on finding root cause and what to do, but they didn't have that 20 years ago when I was doing this. It was more, can I find a book? Is there somebody out that and I've read a lot of books. I have a huge library and I've read most of them, just trying to find what works, and I always come back to, the basis is diet and the gut. And there are a lot of different ways of treating the gut and a lot of ideas on how to treat it. But to me, it's sort of like you have to look at your lifestyle. It's not rocket science. If you're eating a lot of processed food and staying up really late, I mean, like 1, 2, 3 a.m., your body's going to have a hard time working. You have to be able to get enough sleep. You have to be able to eat foods that are densely nutritious, if you will, whole, sort of whole foods. And it's like I can look or try other things, and I'm not one for gimmicks. I'm one for what helps the body work. The body works on food, so let's eat food. If a ketogenic diet, like some people will start out with a paleo diet or a Whole30 diet, and they'll start to feel better. And then they get to a place, well, then you can move from there to a ketogenic diet if you choose. You can do things in steps and series. I'm more, if you get enough sleep and you get enough exercise, and you can eat good food, and you have good relationships with healthy people, that's where it is. I realize, to me, there are some people who do need medication for a period of time. If you're working on PTSD trauma issues that are too hard to hold within you, I find for a short period of time, I'm not talking about long, you may need some medication. It may be very helpful for you to be on medication for that period of time. But as those resolve, as you resolve in therapy what the underlying issues are, your body starts to calm down and your body starts to work, and you don't need the medication. I mean, this is the thing. As you get better, you can notice that you might have side effects, symptoms of the medication. That's a sign you need to come down and off. When I first was in practice, I could take somebody who had depression and anxiety, and we could do therapy for 6 months to 18 months, 2 years, and I could work with their diet during that time. They might have to be on some medication, but they tapered off the medication at the end of the time. They didn't need it anymore. My point was, I want to be obsolete in your life. I want you not to need me. Most of psychiatry is based on, you need me, you have to come see me, you can't handle this yourself. And for the most part, that is really not true. And even if you do need a doctor occasionally, you can still handle a lot of things yourself. And we don't teach self-reliance. We don't teach looking at the body and seeing how you feel and observing what's going on. We don't teach people how to grieve. I think it's a crime. I think everybody needs to know how to grieve. They're just some basics that I think we don't do. I wish there were right now what I'm going to call a school for, I don't know whether you'd call it holistic or integrative psychiatry, but that's sort of been my dream for a long time, that a formal place to be able to, where physicians could come, nurse practitioners could come, PAs could come, and learn how to handle things in a different way.
Yeah, I want to piggyback off of that. I know it's not a direct question, but you said so much there that I related to. One was that when I was doing my therapy training, one thing I noticed is most people, like I would say 100% of my client load for a full year, when I asked them, like, how are you feeling right now? They had no idea.
Yep.
We're so out of touch with how we are feeling from moment to moment. And if anything, this experience has taught me is that it's okay to have feelings. I don't have to be afraid of them. I don't have to, there's a certain learning process that has to happen that we're not learning that in our society, that we're taught that that's the current narrative is you're having an emotion that you can't handle. You need to go see a professional. Don't talk to me about it because you might kill yourself on me or something. And you need to go somewhere to like have someone else deal with that. And I think that's a disempowering message, along with kind of what you mentioned, that I don't know what to call it, like patienthood. Like I became a professional patient. That was my life for like 13 years, was going to the therapist every week to tell them how I feel, and then going to the psychiatrist every month to get my refill. And when you have to take a pill every single day, that tells you something about yourself. There is a message there, implicit or explicit, that there's something wrong with you and that you can't trust your own emotions. And if I would have listened to that, I would be dead. They told me that I would never have children. I would never have a career. I would never have a job. I would not finish college. My psychiatrist signed a piece of paper every year that said I could only take classes for half time. So it took me 9 years to finish college.
Wow.
Those things held me back from my potential, and I believe them. But now that I'm off, I have had to, it's almost like relearn how to be human again. So I just want to urge that medication is just not this informed consent piece about the dangers, that there's other things that come along with it.
Well, and the other thing, medication blocked feelings. So
Yeah.
if you're in therapy and you're trying to get to your feelings and you're on medication, you can't find them because it blocks it. So as you start to come down on the medication, one of the side effects, withdrawal effect if you want, is that all of a sudden you have all these feelings come up to the surface, and you have to have skills to handle them. And you need learning skills is what I'm about. I want somebody, it's great to be in therapy, and you can do a lot of good work processing things in therapy, but you also have to have skills, because 90% of the work happens outside of the office. You know, you're not in a therapy session when something comes up, and you have to have skills to handle it. So, you know, I work with people with either heart math or mindfulness and, you know, other skills to help them handle when feelings come up, what do you do with them? Sometimes you just sit with them. You know, you don't have to do anything. You just have to breathe.
Yeah, I was just coming into the panel, so I just sat while the film was playing. I sat here and did some breathing exercises. Like you have to find a way when the medication is not the issue anymore. I mean, I still have issues. I still have, my problems are still here. You know, it didn't take anything away. If anything, I have more problems, you know?
Well, you recognize them.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, if you're on medication and you can't feel, it's a hazard. It's like if you didn't have touch in your fingers, you'd burn your fingers and not know it. There's a reason for feelings. And what do they talk about? When the eyes are the windows of the soul, I think emotions are the language of the soul. I think this is how you learn to communicate, and how do you find yourself is being able to feel your feelings. So if you're on medication and you can't feel feelings, you're handicapped. I mean, you're really handicapped because you can't be yourself.
So do people tell me all the time that one of the most troubling side effects of the SSRIs, the antidepressants, is that they can't feel their feelings, that they don't feel like a whole person, they can't grieve, they can't cry at funerals, they can't experience joy, and you know, weight gain, sexual side effects, all kinds of other things happen. That's the side effect that people complain about the most. Is that dulling of human emotion that makes people feel alive and connected to other human beings and to their own experiences. So it's a really, really profound thing what you just said.
Okay, this is for Lynn. They want to know, will it be on Netflix, and when and where will it be distributed so we can buy or see it?
We hope it will be on Netflix. We are negotiating with a distributor for international and global rights, and it's complicated. Does one North America, international? So we're in that phase now. But while we're in that phase, we are conducting community screenings. Our community screenings are listed on our website. We ask all of you, if you know of a group of people like this one who would benefit from this film and talking about it, and please to just let us know, contact us. That is what we are doing now. And in many ways, yes, I want Netflix because it'll have a huge audience, but the ability to talk about it and talk to these two great doctors and Angie and hear Angie's experience and specific questions we will not be able to do that once it's on Netflix. And I mean, we will always continue our community screenings, but the value now is this, and hopefully Netflix will come, and we want to do educational distribution, which means getting into universities and schools and med schools. Because again, we want all the young doctors to be and nurses to be talking about all this. These are the issues that need to be addressed. But I wanted to bring up that group of how many, I have 2 college age children, and no one in our family really knew about any of this before I started to research the film. And my kids say that it is everywhere in college. And we had a wonderful screening down at NYU. A good friend is a professor. We came into the classroom, actually it was a film class, and we screened a rough cut of the film, and that professor just was so frustrated. And she talked about this with her students. She said, I am not allowed, if I notice that a student in my class is struggling, I am not allowed to go up to that student and say, hey, is everything okay? I am mandated by my school to go directly to notify the mental health department, and they will take over. So this making such a big deal about mental health and not allowing the people who can have the meaningful conversations, like Dr. Sadler was just beautifully talking about, to say, hey, are you okay? To give those skills to these kids and have it go to a mental health department, which then, as in Dave Cope's situation, all that did was give him 2 drugs. No one ever talked to him. I mean, I think this is a huge problem, and it is not, we're not even allowed to talk about it. So yeah. College campuses, that's where it's all starting.
Well, yeah, I worked on college campuses for 13 years, and that culture it's fascinating. I mean, students are every year arriving on campus with fewer and fewer coping strategies and more medications already on board. So 3, 4 medications in many cases, history of hospitalizations already at 18 years old. It's really, the mental health of students arriving on campus is deteriorating so rapidly that that college mental health services are overwhelmed, and no matter how much money they throw into the system to try to hire more people, they can't meet the demand, because the paradigm of the problem is not correct, you know. So they think that they just need more therapists and need more medication and need more crisis visits, and we're not asking, well, why is this happening, you know? And is there another way we could look at this other than, you know, from a disease model point of view?
I always think about, if the medications and treatments that we have were so advanced, why are we have the all-time high of suicides and disability rates from mental health issues? That's a critical thinking piece that we need to have as an industry.
Well, I also think we need to look at parenting skills. If parents don't have the ability to reach their emotions, how are they going to explain to their children how to handle emotions? Some of this is, we need I want to say a broader education of how to be human. How do you manage children without putting them on medication? I have a dear friend, colleague, who basically retired. She's a psychologist, and she retired the day that they came in and told her that every child she was seeing was required to go see a psychiatrist to be evaluated for medication. And she said, that's not right. You can work with children, you can work with parents, you can help them get to a place without medication. And this is where it starts young. I mean, look at the diet of kids eating. Look at how they're sleeping. What's going on there? Look at their environment. There's a lot of things happening that can be changed. And, you know, I want to say it is deeper, but you have to start somewhere. At some point, you're saying, I'm coming off this meds, I'm doing this a different way. And you find a different way to do it. And that starts your path down something else, rather than the norm, which is, oh, if you've got ADD, let's put you on medication, not let's see if there are other problems causing this, or, you know, are there many other things we could do before we get to needing medication? Some of it's a mindset. When I was growing up, we didn't have all these medications. So it was not a choice or an option. You had to talk to somebody if there were problems, and usually it was your mom or dad. But I realized sometimes that's not an option. Sometimes you need somebody else to talk to, or someone else to help. But having somebody who can be there, to help you, that can give you advice, sound advice on how to manage life's disappointments or joys for that matter. Sometimes they're overwhelming. It's important to get the coping skills. Like they ought to be taught. I think mindfulness ought to be taught in 6th grade. I think everybody ought to have a course in mindfulness to know how to handle their emotions. How do you breathe? Heart math is another one that's really good, that helps the body manage the stress. I mean, you can do a lot of other things. You can do biofeedback. I mean, there are a lot of other things, but simple things you can do for yourself that don't really cost a lot is what I look for. Changing your diet is not, it's a change you choose to make. It's not often a huge economic change to change the food you're eating.
So this person says, I love the film. If your psych doc is against tapering off, what should you do? And along similar lines, someone asked, where can you find a doctor to help you taper if you're already on a lot of medications, especially if you're in like a rural town, or is there telemedicine options?
There are telemedicine options right now because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Most of the insurance companies will cover telehealth, and there may be licensing restrictions, for somebody, for one physician, depending on where you live, but you should be able to find somebody. I mean, if you need to find somebody who's nationwide, I can help you do that, that can help you taper your meds and work with your diet and other things to help you come off the medications. Telehealth is if you can get on a computer or you've got a FaceTime on your phone, you can work with somebody. So if your doctor isn't for it, then you need to look around and find somebody who will. And what I'm going to tell you is not all doctors are trained. I have run into a few patients who had somebody tell them to come off, and they had them come off way too fast. And I had to say, I'm really sorry they told you that, because that's about, 3 times, 4 times faster than what I would recommend. And sometimes you have to back up and start tapering again in a much slower rate, so you don't have the really horrible withdrawal symptoms. So, there are people out there who can help, and finding them, if you have a hard time, you can email me or call me, and we'll find somebody that can work with you.
And I just wanted to add, we had an amazing discussion Saturday for World Benzodiazepine Awareness Day. And one of our great doctors from Canada, Dr. Jim Wright, cautioned in this tapering realm, cautioned against using other medications to help side effects from tapering, because you're just adding on another something that eventually you might have to taper off of. So I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, I would agree with him. And I use supplements sometimes to dampen the withdrawal symptoms until somebody can get down and off. And you just have to go really, really slow. But here again, it's changing your diet to be the foundation support in doing that.
I just wanted to say, from the patient point of view, this is very controversial what I'm about to say, so brace yourselves. But because the medical establishment kind of left the building when it came to deprescribing, online there's about 100,000 case studies I could show you right now of patients that have had to embark on this tapering journey mostly alone. A lot of times when talking about this with your doctor and you say, I'd like to taper off of a psychiatric drug, they can take that as evidence that you don't have insight, or that that's a symptom of your mental illness. Yeah. And it can go disastrous from there, where they will say, oh, you want to get off? We'll get you off in 2 weeks. And then you're in the ER with suicidal thoughts or whatever. And then they'll, like for me, they mistook that for another mental illness symptom. So again, I would say there's two two websites I want to mention. One is Benzo Buddies, which is specific to benzodiazepines. It's a patient-led support group online. And the other one is survivingantidepressants.org. And there was actually a story about this written into the Psychiatric Times by Joseph Witt-During. He now works for the FDA, but it's about the online communities are like the bridge to bring the help that this patient cohort needed. Yeah. So I know it sounds scary to tell people to look on the internet, and every doctor will say, stop Googling, stop talking to Dr. Google. But when there's a lack of information, we have to find what we can. So like I said, I would just educate yourself in all realms, talking to your doctor, trying to find a new doctor, and reading patient groups, and reading about safe tapering, and reading about deprescribing, whatever you can read about. I know it's a lot to digest without a college degree. You almost need a college degree in tapering to get off. But please do that. And what was the last thing? Oh, and that Benzodiazepine Information Coalition also has a list on their website. We don't we can't vouch for a doctor, obviously, because doctors change their minds too, but there is a list of benzo-wise doctors, meaning they recognize the need for safe and slow tapering, patient-led tapering. That's what we try to advocate for. So that's one place. And lastly, the Withdrawal Project. And all those resources are on our website. Again, I'm just going to say that. I just wanted to mention them.
I like the
website's address.
Sorry, Lynn?
Oh, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just going to say I like the term patient-led because as everybody here knows, there's no one right tapering schedule for everybody, and so it really depends. Some people come off these medicines fairly easily, and some people it can take months, and unfortunately sometimes, and the film illustrates, can take years, and there just isn't one size fits all tapering schedules. And I have, as Dr. Sadler has also heard, just the strangest recommendations that people are being given. This happens all the time. A psychiatrist will say, oh, well, you can taper off that medication by taking it every other day, or taking it twice a week, and then next week you're going to take it once a week, and then it just doesn't make any biological sense to do it this way. I think people are really just guessing. They're completely guessing about what will work. I think more physicians could benefit from reading some of these websites. There's not that much written in the psychiatric literature about this. There are some papers coming out now. They exist, but they're not very helpful in a practical sense. They're starting to acknowledge that discontinuation syndromes do occur, which anybody who pays any attention to their patients knows is true. But how to actually do it is much more of an art than a science. And so just finding somebody you can work with who's flexible and open-minded and believes you is just really, really important.
I wanted to you just made me think, the term discontinuation syndrome, in our interview with Dr. Anna Lemke, she unraveled that one. I mean, that is a very, it is the industry way of describing, right. But the other word for it is withdrawal.
Right. Yeah.
Patient blames the patient for stopping, but withdrawal is also a very legitimate way of describing it.
Yeah.
The words matter.
Yes.
Okay, Dr. Eid, this is kind of the opposite to how do you find a doctor? This is a physician asking you, how do you personally begin to broach discussions on weaning off medications for those patients who may be resistant to doing so, but you believe are clearly being harmed, or they're physically dependent, refill appointments? I'm asking this from a family medicine and nutritional perspective in the low-carb keto realm.
Well, that's an interesting question. So, for many years, I worked in settings where my primary job, the reason why I was hired primarily, was to prescribe medications, and I was allowed to use nutrition in my practice with people who were interested, but still the lion's share of my work was with medications, and then coming from this nutrition perspective. So there were many, it happens all the time, that there are people who are taking medications who really are not benefiting from them, who are misusing or abusing them, or emotionally attached to them, or literally being crippled by them emotionally and intellectually, but really are attached to them for whatever reason, many different types of reasons. And it can be one of the most difficult conversations in the world to try to have a conversation with that person where you're expressing your concerns without feeling as though you're, without criticizing how they feel about the medication. So it's again, it's more of an art than a science, and that every case is completely unique. But sometimes it can be very helpful just to reflect back to those people. This is, I tell me what you like about the medicine, how it helps you, some of the things you don't like about it, and then to reflect back, to acknowledge whatever you feel is, you reflect back what they have said to you. You say, well, I hear you saying this and this, and it probably is, it probably is helpful that, these things that you're mentioning, which are positive, I can understand where you're coming from. But just having gotten to know you, and you have to do have to take the time to get to know somebody before you will have the clout to be able to say this. You say, well, here's what I notice. Here's what I'm concerned about. Has anybody else in your life ever expressed these same concerns? Maybe we could all talk together, just sort of bringing it up that way, so that you're not on opposite sides of the problem. You're trying to be on the same side of the problem. And if there's any chink in the armor, and with that attachment to the medication, is saying, if the person mentions anything at all that they think is negative about the medication, to really use that as a starting point for the conversation, and just to remind them that there are some things about the medication that they are concerned about, and figure out what their goals are, and if the medication is interfering with their personal goals and the things that they want for themselves. Because usually the reason I'd be mentioning these things is because I do think that the medicine is impairing them in some important way, that I think it's worth bringing it up. So, and then of course, if I'm prescribing the medication, I don't have to keep prescribing it. I can refer them to somebody else if I don't feel comfortable anymore, if I feel it's the wrong medication for them, or if I feel it's doing more harm than good, and I no longer feel comfortable prescribing it. Or I can say, let's make a safe taper plan if you don't want to see somebody else, because I feel like this medication is doing more harm than good, and I don't want to harm you. So I know it's kind of a long answer, but it does depend on the circumstances. But I think that everything starts with a good relationship, a trusting relationship. If you don't have that, you can't have a conversation about stopping medicine or starting medication in certain cases where medication can be important. So it's all about trust and the relationship and the alliance, and just trying to see things from their point of view, and having a relationship where they might actually listen to something that you have to say if they trust you.
Okay, so I'm just looking at the time, and I realize we've all sat for a long movie, and now we've done about an hour of discussions. So I think we should probably go around and maybe give some closing thoughts, or list off. A lot of people asked for resources, that kind of thing. So Angie, do you want to start, or?
Sure. I think I'll just say, for any patient or ex-patient out there, just educate yourself, like I keep saying over and over, that stories can change. Like for me, at one time, I thought the medications were helping me and they saved my life, and then they no longer were, and they were actually hurting me. So remember that stories can change, that there are alternatives, that there are people in the world that care about you and want to validate you and listen to your story and help you heal. And that I just wish the best for everyone. And the only reason I do this is to try to prevent more people from being as harmed as I have been, and a lot of the people that I help that are harmed. And so just spread the word, share the word. And then one administrative note is just follow us on Facebook. I post articles every day about these topics, so you could get a free education if you just follow our Facebook page. It's Medicating Normal. And Twitter and Instagram, YouTube, we have over 100 clips that were like supplemental material to the film, all the different experts talking. There's some lived experience stories that aren't in the film. And every Friday at noon, we release a new clip. And then we have more screenings coming up. So I think if you signed up for this event, you'll be in our newsletter. So you'll probably get a notification, but at any time you want to not be in the newsletter, you can hit opt out. So we'll be sending out some stuff about future screenings very soon.
Dr. Eid?
Well, yeah, I just want to thank Angie and everybody else in the film for it's not an easy thing to share these kinds of stories. They're very personal. You run a huge risk when you share these kinds of stories with people. Lots of different strong opinions out there. I know that that's not easy, and so I appreciate it because I think what you're doing. I mean, you're doing a lot of things, but one of the things I think you're really doing is getting people to take a second look at the role medication plays in their lives when so many times a medication is prescribed and people just never think about it again. They're started on a medication during some sort of time of crisis or something going on in life, and then the medication is never stopped. And people are kind of afraid to stop it because, you know, what happens? What if the depression comes back, or what have you? I talk with people all the time on medications for 15, 20 years, and I say, well, you know, why are you still on that medication, or is it still helping you? And they say, I don't know. I have no idea. I've been on it for 20 years. I have no idea. So sometimes it's important. It gets a conversation going in a person's mind about, well, why am I taking this medication? And do I still need this medication? And is this medication doing me more harm than good? And maybe I should have a conversation with a family member, a friend, a doctor, nurse about this and start to think about it because, you know, a lot of times people just take it for granted that medicines are just something you're supposed to take forever. So I really appreciate the courage that it took for you to tell your story and all the resources that you're making available to people. I'll put the Facebook page, I'll put some resources up because people had asked some specific questions. But I really would just, the message here from all of us is really just about empowering people. You know, it doesn't have to be, you know, doctor patient. It can be two people having a conversation about health, mental health, physical health, emotional health, spiritual health. And that should really be a two-way conversation, not a one-way conversation.
And Dr. Eid, I just have a quick question that I'm curious to know. Would you ever go on Joe Rogan and talk about these things if you were invited?
Oh yeah, no, of course. I think it's a really important topic, and I think it's a complex topic and I think that's really been reflected in this very thoughtful panel. That lots of people there are many different ways of looking at these topics. It's not black and white, but the story that's being told in this film needs to be validated by as many psychiatrists as are willing to talk about it, because we can't have people out there saying these things are happening to them and people not believing them, because it's from 20 years of prescribing medicine, I can tell you these stories are real. And so I of course would be willing to talk more about this in a public, sort of a very public setting such as that.
Dr. Sadler?
Well, I have great appreciation for all of you who produced this film and were in this film, and the message that you're getting across to people, I think, is so important and so not acknowledged by conventional medicine. So to start any kind of conversation, but I'm going to tell you, this is a grassroots effort. This is coming from people deciding that something they're doing isn't helping them and making a decision to do something different in a positive way. And I think that is worth a whole lot, to say you have the power to make choices. And you have choices about what you eat, but you also have choices about anything you put in your body, you have a choice about. And you need to realize that medication is one of those. And to bring up the question that medicine has side effects, it may not be something that you want to be on forever or even longer term rather than shorter term, if you don't absolutely have to, if you can't find alternatives. And I really feel like this movie is a wonderful way to start a discussion, both with people on medication and physicians who are prescribing medication.
Lynn?
Thank you so much to our two doctors on the panel, and to steal a remark that Nicole made yesterday to two other great doctors. So yes, there are great doctors. You guys are our heroes. And as Nicole said, it's not the Kardashians, it's doctors like you who have found a different way and who are giving permission and listening to their patients. And we all salute you guys, and you give us hope. And I'm just hoping that, well, we will make sure that everyone who got a link to this film will be able to know how to reach both of you.
Right.
Because, you know, they should be able to. And thank you all for joining.
Well, thank you for having us.
Conversation. Let's continue the conversation.
I agree.
Before we go, do either of you want to list off your website or anything where people can find you? Dr. Eid or Dr. Sadler?
Sure. So I have a website called Diagnosis Diet, which has information about nutrition and health. And I write for Psychology Today. I have a lot of articles there about nutrition and mental health. I'm also on Facebook and on Twitter if you're a social media type. Yeah, I'm easy to find.
Yeah, I'm at NatalieSadlerMD.com. That's my website. It's pretty simple, and it gives you an idea of some of the things that I do. So,
And we're medicatingnormal.com.
yeah. Okay.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us today.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you, Nicole.
Bye-bye.
Bye.